Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with clinical psychologist and personality change researcher Shannon Sauer-Zavala. She has dedicated her career to developing psychological treatments to help people recover from mental health difficulties. She is focused on proven strategies to shape the personality traits that put people at risk for anxiety, depression, substance misuse, and much more. She shows all proven strategies to nudge their personality traits for success. It's quite a story. Enjoy.
Well, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today.
Sure.
So before we get into your world of psychology, I want to know first and foremost something that was probably pretty paramount in your world. You know, going through this pandemic 4 years ago, we were trying to figure out how long it was going to last, the ramifications, and I'm curious, how did you make it through that time period, and how did it change the way that you approach your work now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really hit home for me some of the things that I know kind of academically breed anxiety, right? So one of the biggest things that kind of causes anxiety is uncertainty, and people differ on how willing they are to tolerate not knowing the answer. And I think with COVID and being isolated and not knowing how long it was going to last, really seeing, in myself, in my family, in my patients, seeing this kind of like academic idea, right, that we study, seeing it really manifest at a grand scale. And then...
So did you... go ahead. You're good. No, you're good.
Say, in terms of my practice, I mean, one of the things I think, is sort of a silver lining around the pandemic is that, prior to, isolation, we, as a field, kind of looked down on the idea of providing telehealth. Like, oh no, I couldn't possibly, it would never be the same as face-to-face therapy. And the pandemic forced providers to provide treatment face-to-face, over Zoom. And for me, I was in the middle of a research study. So I'm an academic psychologist, and we had been doing face-to-face therapy. And in order to continue the study, we switched to Zoom. And the cool thing about that is we collected data on therapeutic alliance between the patient and the therapist, and of course on outcomes. And what we found is that there are absolutely no differences in how better people get, how much they connect with their therapists from being face-to-face or being on Zoom. And in fact, some people didn't want to be on Zoom because, I don't know if you remember, but there was all that like, what's Zoom doing with the cloud recordings at the time? So some of my patients were kind of uncomfortable with that, and we just did structured CBT over the phone, and they got better too. So I think, in terms of access, that's huge.
I think that was one of the things that was revolutionary about the going through the pandemic. There was a lot of silver linings. And I think, first of all, there was a spotlight on mental health, as before people kind of treated it like a cold. Get over it, that kind of a thing. And I think there was a heightened awareness from people about that. But also, my son is on the spectrum, and it was always kind of arduous to go through the picking him up, whether it was at school or kind of rushing to go there. It would be 20, 30 minutes away, and they would only see him for 5 or 10 minutes and spend the bulkhead talking to us, that kind of a thing. So when telehealth came around, I love it. It was a godsend because they could focus on me. I could have him on for his 5, 10 minutes, and then we could kind of move on and do our thing. So it just seemed like it was just from resources to logistics, it all made more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, for people that are busy or are doing sessions where, part of the time is spent with the kid and part of the time is spent with parents, it's like a sort of a practical issue. And then I'm in Kentucky, which is a really rural state. I live in Lexington, which is a city, right? And so there's plenty of mental health providers here, but there are plenty of counties in the state where there isn't a single licensed mental health provider. And so being able, in the study, I got to connect with people in really rural Appalachian counties that wouldn't have had access to that kind of care otherwise.
So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. And I want to put you in front of a bunch of third grade students at Career Day. And one of the curious kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Yeah, well, I guess I can quote my my daughter when she was in kindergarten. She described my job as making sad people feel better. And then my other daughter, she described me as a teacher doctor, because like trying to kind of encapsulate the stuff that I do at the university. And so I think the easiest way to describe my day-to-day is that I have a couple different categories of activities. And so the first, as a university professor, I teach classes. Mostly I teach people that are learning to be therapists, so graduate students, teach them how to do therapy from like in class kind of teaching about, sort of the theories to actually doing clinical supervision where they video record their sessions and we watch and I say, when the patient said this, maybe you could have responded like this instead. So that's like the, what I'm doing kind of on the teaching side. The other part of my university job, and really the main part, is research. So my research is focused on making mental health treatments more efficient, so people get better faster, and so that people don't sit on wait lists for so long, and making treatment more effective so people get more better. And so I spend a lot of time asking the government to give me money to do these clinical trials. I spend a lot of time supervising my therapists on the trials, who are typically graduate students. I see patients on the trials myself. And then once the study's over, I put all of the data into a data analytic program, and try to figure out, like, are people less symptomatic at the end of the treatment versus at the beginning? So that's kind of the research side of things. I have, in terms of like the other hat that I wear, like I have a private practice. So I see, it's pretty small. I see a couple patients a week, but I'm providing evidence-based therapy, typically via telehealth. I'm licensed in Kentucky, but one thing that the government has done well is pass this legislation called PsyPact that allows me to practice in 41 different states. And so that's pretty cool. Again, that opens up access. And then the kind of third thing that I do is training therapists all over the country, really all over the world, in the treatments that we develop and test in our research studies.
So how did you get to this point? Take me back to your childhood where you were born and raised, and what were the seeds that were planted in you? Because you're definitely in a profession that requires a lot of you, and you have to give a lot to help people get to better places. How did this all evolve into who you are today?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So and something that I've reflected on a lot, because right now my research is really focused on treating underlying personality vulnerabilities that put a person at risk to develop a mental health condition. And, I've really been reflecting on, is this just for people who, are struggling, that they might want to shift some of these traits or vulnerabilities, or can everyone do that? So I've been thinking about my own life and really reflecting on my own journey to get me to where I am, because honestly, if you had told, 16-year-old me that this is what I would be doing, I would be surprised. So, when I cast this on, in terms of personality traits, I think that I've always been a really empathetic person, always been really, kind of the person that if another kid was crying in elementary school in my class, would go over and pat them on the back. So always was really attuned to how other people were feeling. But was pretty lazy and not very achievement striving necessarily. And we actually had a psychologist come to my high school and talk about their career path. And I remember so clearly thinking, no way. I remember being interested. Oh, I'm going to go to this, because I want to help people. And then clearly thinking, no way, that's way too much school. And so I really wasn't kind of a person. I skipped class a lot in high school. I actually failed math my junior year and had to repeat it. So I'm not just being self-deprecating when I say this, kind of lazy. I did not have my stuff together. And so when I went to college, I don't know, like still was pretty unmoored, didn't really know what I wanted to do, and ended up taking an intro to psychology class, and it was at 8 a.m. So again, I was like not really attending class that consistently, but there was something about the psych class obviously interested me, and so I got up, got myself out of bed, and went to every class meeting. And when we took the first exam, most people did really poorly, and I did really well. And the TA pulled me aside and was like, Shannon, you should really consider majoring in psychology. And given that I didn't really have a direction, I was like, cool, sure, I'll do that. But I think more important than that, like that was really reinforcing, and it changed the way I thought about myself, right? Like maybe I'm good at this. Like maybe I'm good at psychology. And so I took other psychology classes. I continued to do well, really reinforcing that belief that like I'm a psychology major. And, continued to not do well in my 2 semesters of Spanish, intro to bio, other requirements. And so by my junior year, I was like, oh my gosh, I think that I really like the psychology thing. I want to go to grad school and get my PhD. And I remember talking to a professor about it, and she was like, well, your overall GPA is not great. You're probably not going to get in. And so that was really upsetting at the time. But, as a psychologist, I know that experiencing negative emotions like guilt can be really beneficial because the innate purpose of that emotion is to tell you, stop making that mistake, like do something different. And so I started to apply myself more consistently. And then, when I got into graduate school, I studied like how mental health conditions develop, and that just like, it was really interesting and gave me like a lot of insight, but it wasn't until I was on my postdoc at Boston University that I learned about like doing treatment outcome research. And that I think really just ticked all the boxes because it allowed me to be involved with treatment. Like when you do treatment, you're working with one person. So you're making a difference to that person, but you're not necessarily like shifting the needle on mental health. And when I was doing like more basic research, trying to understand how mental health conditions develop, like I wasn't really helping anybody necessarily. Like that was more steps removed from patient care. And so I think that's how I really came to treatment outcome research. I could work with patients in the context of the study. But at the end of the day, I would be like producing the knowledge that would help refine treatments, make them better, and down the road, more therapists in practice would be using better treatments, and that would help everybody. Yeah,
For sure. So who's been kind of an inspiration or a hero for you in your professional journey?
Yeah. So one person that I think really stands out is Marsha Linehan. So she is the developer of a treatment called DBT, for dialectical behavior therapy. And, she is, in a field that was mostly men, like she's sort of one of the kind of like leaders that's a woman. So that is really awesome. And she didn't like choose an easy path, right? So she chose to work with people that were chronically suicidal, like people that there really wasn't any evidence-based care for, that most therapists were like, I don't work with people with borderline personality disorder. And she developed the first evidence-based treatment and really studied it very scientifically and showed that indeed folks with this condition can experience relief, they can get better, they can recover. And so I think that that's really awesome. More recently, I think in like maybe 2010, 2011, she wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about like being a person with lived experience, and that she actually had BPD and that had been hospitalized as a teenager and in her early 20s. And so I think that's really inspirational too, because it really shows that like it doesn't have to matter where you start, and you can take those experiences, like her experiences in hospital systems where she was just like alone in a room by herself for days at a time, and use that as the like motivation to make things better for people that come after you.
So if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
Oh my gosh. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I can think of like so many different, different people that I'd want to meet for different reasons. Like I'd want to meet Meghan Markle and be like, what happened? But I think if I'm going with my actual like good answer, I'd want to meet Michelle Obama.
Yeah, that would be a really good one. So I'm curious, in your work, you have to give a lot of yourself to help your patients and clients, but you also have to retain enough back to evolve and to keep yourself healthy as a human. How do you find that balance? What gets you up every day to do this work and to effectively balance all of that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was a lot harder when I was first starting out. So when I first started seeing patients in graduate school, like I felt like if I had like 2 patients or 3 patients on a given day, like I couldn't do any writing. I couldn't really do any other kind of work. And now I think like just with experience, you get better at kind of compartmentalizing. But when people are going through, and not everybody that you work with is going through something that like really like affects you deeply. But you do have people that you work with that have faced really difficult hardships. Maybe they've shared, in a particular session, they've shared, their trauma history with you. And those are things that like, you can't just shake off so easily after the session and just kind of move on. And so I think the first thing to do is, or for me that I do, is give myself a break if that's happening, right? If I'm not able to transition into like whatever I had on my to-do list to do next. And then the other thing I do is really practice what I preach, right? So, for me, I know that there are things that like help me kind of get through the day, right? And sometimes I do them consistently and sometimes I don't, and I can really feel the difference. So for me, like going for a walk in the morning is really important. It sounds like, I don't know, like maybe like an exercise in vanity, but like putting in my contacts and like putting makeup on, like that I think like helps me just feel like more put together and more polished. I try really hard not to work after 5 o'clock. So I come home, I have kids, little kids. So I come home and I am making dinner and, that I think helps a lot. That there's something that I have to be really mindfully present for because, you can't, they demand it, right? And so that helps you make a transition. And, honestly, like, I think the opposite is true too. Like, providing therapy, at least for me, in some ways is like a flow state, right? Like, you have to be really present with the person. It's really hard to think about other stuff when you're in a therapy session. So if I have something on my mind, like maybe I had a weird interaction with a coworker, or maybe I had a little spat with my husband, and I've been ruminating about it, and I go into session, usually I'm in a much better mood when I come out because I have just really gotten into something that I feel like I'm good at, and that like, you just can't think about other things when you're really present with your client.
So talk to me a little bit about, of all of these things that you've accomplished and done in your life and career, what are you the proudest of, both personally and professionally?
I think I'm most proud of how I mentor graduate students because clinical trials, treatment research, it's really a team sport. And I don't think, I'm not under the illusion that I'm going to solve the mental health crisis by myself, right? And so I think collaborating with other people or like training future therapists or training future treatment researchers to really value patient input, to value, to realize that like patients maybe know best or could provide some really valuable insight into like what would make the treatment better. I think the more people that are coming at mental health problems in a way similar to me is really, would contribute to my legacy and is something that I'm really proud of.
Let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've led, the wisdom you've gained. What advice would you impart on that young version of you, and would that version listen?
I think I would tell her that that it's possible to develop the confidence and the abilities, like the skills, to live the life that you want, right? And that it's possible for you to change quite a bit and really enhance the things that you like about yourself, like being a really caring person, and, work on the things that maybe weren't working as well, like my maybe not so great reliability.
So at the end of the day, everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone around you, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think that I am a driven person that wants to leave a positive mark on the world.
Well said. Perfect. So if anyone out there wants to hire you, learn more about you, reach out, any of the good business, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, so probably the most direct place that has all the things is my website, and it is www.personality-compass.com. And I'm also on all the social medias, so at self.made.personality on Instagram, at Sauer-Zavala on Twitter, and on LinkedIn. I don't know how you cite LinkedIn, but I'm on there too.
Yeah, I'm sure you got a very unique name. I think everybody can find that pretty easily. So
yeah.
This has been wonderful, Shannon. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. Keep doing the wonderful work out there.
Thank you. Thank you for reaching out. This was really fun. Good questions.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.